All right. The next one we're going to watch is from a channel we haven't watched in a while. But this is definitely right up my alley. MISC Prospector, From Cold Boot to Cold Cash. This is from the Astro Historian, Star Citizen lore on the Prospector.
My name is Paul Shelley, and welcome to the Astro Historian. This is a channel dedicated to exploring and explaining the lore of sci-fi and space universes and discussing their impact. Today we'll be talking about the most famous and tortured project to ever come out of MISC's High Industrial Division, Project Cold Boot, and how an experiment on freelancer variations became the standard mining vehicle in the universe of Star Citizen.
So this is cool. This was from last week's lore post.
Before we get into that, I want to thank y'all for your continued support. The last video I did on the Bengal carrier blew up faster than any other video I've done on the channel so far, causing a massive spike in new subs and viewers. If you're one of them, I'd like to thank you for joining me on this ride, and hope you continue to enjoy my looks into the lore of sci-fi and space universes for years to come. If you've been enjoying my videos, be sure to hit the like button. And if you haven't already subscribed, then be sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell icon to stay up to date on the latest videos. If you want to go that extra mile, we also have YouTube memberships and Ko-fi for financial donations. Lastly, if you want early ad-free access to these videos, consider joining the Patreon as well. All those links are in the description. In order to understand how the Prospector became the ship it is today, we need to understand two things: the status of mining in the 30th century, and the experimentations on the freelancer by MISC known as Project Cold Boot. By the early 30th century, the field of mining was not seen as one for lone miners. Small mining ships just weren't very popular in the market. We know some of them were in operation in the Stanton system as early as the mid-29th century, as many of these solo mining ships were involved in the crash of the UES Fleisa on Crusade.
And so that is like a key thing that freaks me out a little bit. Obviously the Orion's coming, right? But we've seen a lot of things around mining over the years. Obviously there's a big mining platform in Squadron 42. Shubin mining facility or something like that. I can't remember the name of the company in the Squadron 42 as far as mining goes. But everything that was advertised about mining pre-actually putting it in the game looked less like the mining that we have today, which is just breaking these individual, even in 319, small nodes, right? You know, something that can fit on a singular ship, stuff like that. Not repeatable, come back to it. Like, look at the image on the screen. What if everything you see here was mineable? What if every object on the screen was mineable, salvageable, and you found this on your own and you come back to it over and over and over again? And if somebody else stumbles across your mining operation, maybe they bring their friends. It's a competition. People are competing over this, right? That is not something that's in Star Citizen. And when they talk about the lore now of, well, previously it was all big operations and they wiped nearly everything out and now it's all small operations, right? That's what scares me, is that there'll never be this, that where you go out there and you're just mining and you go back to it over and over and over again for days, preferably weeks for me.
Moon of Daymar during an illegal mining operation which spun out of control. However, most mining vessels were massive, like the RSI Orion, and were designed to strip asteroids in a matter of hours. The catch was only large corporations like Shubin Interstellar tended to be able to operate these hulking giants. Thus, there was little to no demand for smaller mining vessels, as it was...
I think it was bigger than the Orion. Like, I think it was these like purpose-built platforms that didn't fly or anything. Things like Grimhex.
Publicly seen as just not profitable. That would change in 2927, thanks to an eager fan of MISC who used her first run Prospector to prove just how much profit there was for the average person. But before we get to that, we also need to understand the second part of the Prospector story, Project Cold Boot. This was an engineering team at MISC High who were organized to develop additional revenue streams from existing MISC assets, using limited resources. What would become the Prospector came out of this team working with the Freelancer Light Transport project. Having already seen success modifying the base Freelancer for both survey and fire suppression missions, MISC was keen to study even more unlikely uses for the chassis. To that end, MISC's management reluctantly agreed to write off 9 Freelancers, which were transferred to the Cold Boot team. 3 were complete and space-tested, while the others were left in various stages of construction and shipped alongside their intended components.
And obviously the Prospector must have changed because it's much smaller in the cockpit area, right?
From there, the team spitballed different roles for a purpose-built Freelancer variant. After coming up with almost 300 different ideas, they broke up into 3 smaller teams to try to make the top 3 options they came up with. These were the Freeminder, the so-called brain ship, whose job was to act as a secure data relay, the Observer, a military-focused space-to-ground recon vehicle, and the one thought least to make it past the trials, known simply as the Miner. This is for the aforementioned lack of demand or need for smaller mining vessels. By 2914, the first 2 pitches had petered out entirely. The Freeminder proved unable to produce and effectively prototype, with the Freelancer's internal space unsuited to shielding the number of system blades needed for the project.
In before, they changed the lore once there's like info running in the game. Oh, there's a MISC ship called the Freeminder. Like, oh yeah, that we're bringing it back. We're bringing it back. Yeah, we're gonna try again.
Observer had gotten a bit further, proving space-worthy in simulations.
Because the only reason that something like that failed was because there's no gameplay to sell it with.
Even having a transparent nose cone built to allow for video and photographic systems to function, when word came down that the military had changed its mind on the project due to shifting budgets. That just left the least likely of the 3 ships remaining, the Miner. The Miner had progressed into the physical prototype stage, but it was looking, well, rough to say the least. The first was dubbed the Prospector Proof of Concept Demonstrator A-1, or just the A1 for short. This thing was an ugly and ungainly beast, as the team had to work with limited budget and couldn't afford a custom-made mining head. So they took the smallest laser mining head on the market, the Dalen Cruise, and just welded it with 4 supports onto the side of the ship. You see, the head itself was the size of the entire Freelancer cockpit, and that meant that the ship lost all aerodynamics as a result. What the A1 technology demonstrator lacked in looks or handling, it made up for in functionality. Over the course of 26 flights conducted by MISC test pilots, the A1 racked up successes in a number of areas, considered necessary for the program to continue. These flights proved that the Freelancer's stock drive could in fact power the mining apparatuses, that the hull could be modified to load ore and other materials while in flight, and that, with some practice, a trained pilot could effectively conduct more delicate, high-value mining operations using the ship's thrusters. The prototype program continued, with 4 of the Freelancer chassis ultimately being converted into increasingly advanced demonstrators, designated the A2, A3, and finally B1. By the space trials for the final demonstrator, the B1, the mining attachment had been integrated into a large sheath astride the underside of the cockpit. The result was a mechanism that the pilot could very effectively maneuver, giving them the ability to make the kind of delicate mining maneuvers for which larger ships had to deploy specialized surface craft. The management at MISC was elated and saw the potential.
And that's the part that scares me. Is that I you know what? That's the part that scares me. We'll let him keep talking because they're going to get to it.
Potential for the ship to create a new market for independent mining crews. The board was ultimately so convinced that they removed the effort from Cold Boot entirely, funding the project and assigning a team of top engineers to develop it into a distinct design rather than a Freelancer conversion. Over the next 8 years, MISC internal teams worked together on 2 projects.
So that's when it became its own thing.
The design team focused on developing the unique Freelancer-inspired spacecraft hull that, while using many off-the-shelf parts, would be constructed ground up and organized to best support how they envisioned small-scale mining would be most effective. Meanwhile, a handsomely funded research and development team focused on the biggest technological hurdle in the project, miniaturizing a mining array to the point that it could be stored within a small ship's fuselage while still giving it an effective energy output. To meet this task, MISC licensed the Dylan Cruz design used on the Cold Boot miner, and
Look. You can see it. You can see it too, right at the bottom of the screen right here. Once filtered any tailings and waste materials. Right there. So inert material is supposed to come out of that, and you're not supposed to have any inert material in your ship. Never functioned, never will function.
relentlessly cut down and miniaturized components in a painstaking multi-year process. The ship, now named the Prospector, began proper space trials in 29-23. Live testing went extremely well, with only limited teething issues. The base ship was ready for flight some 6 months before the first version of the drill was completed, so the initial test flights focused on handling and were flown with only a weighted simulation. Late in the year, the first mining assembly came off the line and delighted thousands of aerospace engineers by slotting into place aboard a Prospector hull and then immediately humming to life. MISC unveiled the Prospector to the galaxy in what it called a special preview showing at the 29-24 IAE. The crowd reaction was harsh, with reviewers praising the design but strongly criticizing the existence of the ship in the first place. Critics claimed that it was a ship for no one and would never find a market that would effectively use it. As a result, there was almost no interest from buyers at the show, and pre-orders for the next Freelancer immediately outshone the Prospector. Although MISC's management opted to continue the expensive planned 29-25 model year rollout for the commercial model, many employees privately expressed doubts because of the media's reaction. There was some resentment at their treatment, as they noted that if Robert Space Industries had been developing the Prospector, they would have been given carte blanche to quote-unquote sell the dream with the new design. It seemed
Robert Space Industries selling the dream? No way.
No one was willing to think of MISC in the same way. Sadly for MISC's stock prices, the media reaction was prophetic. Sales of the Prospector hit rock bottom shortly after launch and stayed there for 2 full years. It was then that a loyal MISC customer named Chloe Rasnick would single-handedly change the fate of the Prospector. Rasnick had purchased one of the first Prospectors ever built in 29-25, as she had purchased a former military testing area on Farron 2 in the hopes of salvaging expended shells and claiming the small bounties on radioactive debris collection. Over the 2 years surveying her lot, she discovered a deep chasm in which she navigated her Prospector. There, she discovered a massive amount of raw materials that had been ignored in the past. This was only thanks to the small size of the Prospector that allowed them to even be found in the first place.
And that is what made the Prospector happen. And that is not in the video game. That's not in the video game. You don't go down a chasm and mine right now. You just mine whatever stuff is on the surface. So, like, the thing that made the Prospector happen still doesn't exist. You can go down in caves. I think there's some minables there, but it's not like they're the best minables unless something's changed in 3.19. You know? It's they're so much harder to find and stuff like that. Like, obviously, Kuja ore, like is being said in chat, is somewhere where you can go over and over again because I think it has a quantum point. But most of the caves, not easy to find. There's some hand minables. There might be a couple Prospector minables, but it's obviously way more purposeful to fly around the surface and use them. So the idea of the nimble nature of the Prospector is not currently existing in the game yet. And I would like to see that become more of a thing. I always looked at it that way, that, you know, when I was still very high on copium for Star Citizen and not really able to see any of the flaws or issues, what I would always think about is, okay, the asteroid belt is going to be so dense that a mole can't get through it, or an Orion can't fly through it, so a Prospector is going to have to go through it and break up some of these rocks. But in reality, what ended up happening is, okay, well, this rock is this much mass and has this characteristic to it. You can't break it with the Prospector, maybe with a few of them and some, modules or whatever, but most likely not. You're better off taking a mole. And then they'll probably step that up to the Orion with even larger stuff. Hopefully the Orion has like unique and special types of gameplay that comes with it, but probably not. And that just returns me back to the place where the name is kind of perfect, because its nimble nature allows you to find other nodes quicker than the mole. So flying quickly and prospecting and then bringing in what you need to finish up is more likely what this ship's role is going to play, along with exactly what made it popular, a solo player finding something valuable, right? But that is my concern mostly still, even after 3.19 and the changes, is not seeing fields of nodes that you can continuously come back to that you would have to mark. And that is a huge concern of mine for the future of Star Citizen and the future of Star Citizen mining. We'll have to see.
It became known as the
Real
Chessex Lode, and was the largest find of minerals in 2927. And the key for MISC was that it wasn't just found using their ship, but that it wasn't found by a major company like Shubin, but an independent operator who, overnight, became a trillionaire. Within days of the discovery, Prospector sales shot through the roof as people rushed to try their hand at this new career. Just as the core group team once predicted, the Prospector had given rise to a new class of miner, and now their work had equipped those independent miners to take on the galaxy. Since 2925, MISC has made several iterative updates on the basic Prospector, with two models, 2929 and 2938, being considered the most significant. The 2947 model incorporated a complete rework of the mining array and a new system for ore storage, which is significantly more efficient than the original. The Prospector would go on to spark a wave of interest in solo and small group mining operations in the UEE, being the main reason for Argo to greenlight their multi-operator laser extractor.
Did my screen go black, or did he accidentally leave a black period?
Today, the Prospector remains the face of Wildcat mining operations in the verse, being a common sight in many asteroid belts and moons, all looking to make the long shot of turning their dreams into reality. I'd like to thank you for watching. I'd like to thank those on screen now for supporting the channel financially. If you want to throw in a few credits, think about becoming a member on YouTube. And if you want a bit more for your contribution, join the Patreon. You see, Patreons get early ad-free access to all videos, including exclusive early access to my long-running Complete History of Star Citizen lore series, whose 3 episodes are available to the public now. If you want to know what you're getting, check them out in the top right. Now, I want to hear your thoughts on the Prospector and any other lore topics in the comments below. And as always, remember, ex Historia ad Astra.
That was good. That was good. We all know I love the Prospector. It's one of my favorites. And seeing how it came about is one of the first. That was one of the first lore posts I actually sat down and read. And then hearing it with the visuals and stuff is just, it's way better to watch these on Astro's channel than to read them, in my opinion. So yeah, I enjoyed that. It's just hearing everything about the lore based off of what they're capable of doing right now. It is concerning for mining as a future for me. That's where I love where it is right now, but where it needs to be in the future does scare me a little bit, just a little bit.